What about the theory of the left? Elon's posted a lot where he says, I'm not, I haven't moved to the right. I'm still in the same place, but the left has moved more to the left. Do you agree with that theory first? You
No,
don't.
I don't. No.
How would you explain that the so kind of actually the kind of MAGA Avengers, Trump, Tulsi, RFK, Elon, they're all former Democrats.
Yeah. So every one of them is different. And again, the left is not ubiquitous, so or uniform. So first on Elon, if anybody says the Democratic Party has moved to the left, they're nuts. The Democratic, except to be fair, at the local level. Okay, so I'll come back to that in a second. Okay, but at the national level, they just become more and more corporatist. So now they're all of a sudden the party of Dick Cheney, and they're the party of every corporation that comes by and gives them a donation. So that's not left. That's I don't know that that's right either. That's just corporatist and establishment, right? So, but when he's talking about the lefts, he could be talking about the leftists that I get in it, and he probably is talking about the leftists that I get into fights with, right? So, and there we're all going to have different lines. So, for example, the leftists say that I'm terrible on transgender rights and I don't believe in transgender rights. That's a total lie. I think transgender people should have the same exact rights as every other American citizen, and I would never back down from that. Okay. But I say a professional sports league should be able to make a decision on who gets to compete in that league. And they're like, let's see. Okay. So, all right. Well, that's moving to the left. And what's happening since Young Turks is the longest running show in internet history, we've been through so many of these battles and wars and movements, etc. And when we first started, it was actually me and Ben Mankiewicz. Ben's now the host at Turner Classic Movies. And I remember probably the first, maybe second year, we're on the radio on Sirius Satellite Radio. We're the first show on there too. And we said, if we get back to the old days of the left wing coming back and saying crazy shit, that means, okay, good, we're moving, the country's becoming more moderate. Because at that point, the Republicans were so strong. They were starting the Iraq war with total nonsense. They were dominant. And all the communists had been crushed. The extreme left had been crushed. They didn't even exist. And I said, when we're back to the middle, that means we've started to win. So I guess that's ironic good news, because now all of a sudden we're kind of back to the middle. And there is now a communist wing. I mean, it's tiny, tiny. So when people say Kamala Harris is communist, that's insanity. No, she's a corporatist. She'll do anything a corporate donor wants. Again, so will Trump, so will McConnell, so will Biden, right? That's the opposite of communist. But there are real socialists, etc.
Mm.
And so Haas, for example, is to my left, and he thinks some positions that didn't even exist for a long time in American politics, of just being more socialist, etc. Actual socialists rather than what people call socialists.
Yeah, you mentioned Elon earlier. My question, I would consider a mistake by the left or by the Democrats. I've seen and I've interviewed the Brendan Carr from the FCC. Now I've seen some of the kind of the lawfare from the SEC, the DOJ. I've got so many names here, I don't know what they stand for anymore. The FFA, the FTC, the NLB, the Southern District of New York, even the Fish and Wildlife Service, targeting Elon's companies. Now you might say some of them are legitimate. Elon's got a pretty large empire. Others are just silly, like the FCC taking away the $900 million grant from Starlink, which made no sense considering the amount of progress they've made, considering the government themselves were using and signing contracts with Starlink. So would you agree that the Democrats made a mistake in not embracing Elon and kind of forcing him more to the right, giving him no choice? And if you do agree, then what was the thinking behind that?
No, I don't agree with that. So look, you could agree with parts of Elon's ideology or agenda, etc. And if I sat across from him, if we talked for a long, long time, maybe we wind up agreeing on 70, 80% of stuff. I don't know. Right. But he's a businessman and he has certain business interests, and he runs several corporations. And so when he goes to deal with the government, he's going to have ass. And so, do I think the government should give him whatever he wants? No, I do not. So I don't want the government giving ExxonMobil or JP Morgan Chase or Tesla or any other corporation any goodies. They've already gotten a lot of goodies. They've gotten nonstop subsidies. A lot of Elon's companies have been subsidized by the government. And so corporations keep asking for more and more. And then they say deregulate. I say to my friends on the left and the right, should we regulate or not? I don't know. It depends, doesn't it? What are we regulating? So, for example, a regulation is don't punch people in the face. That's a regulation by the government. You can call it a regulation, a law, a rule. They're all the same exact thing. Regulations are just laws, right? So that's a good regulation. If you say, here, the example I often use is when my dad had a small business in New Jersey growing up, they would inspect the elevators 6 times a year. And my dad was like, how about we do it twice? Okay. Twice is you need to inspect the elevators. Otherwise, as happened in Turkey from time to time, they fall. So you need inspection. You need some form of regulation. But can it get too much? Of course it can get too much. What are we doing it 6 times a year for, right? But yeah, make sure that they work twice a year. So you see my point, which is it depends on the job that we're doing.
It's a fair point. But then when you see things up, did you see the leaks? And I had Matt Taibbi on the show with Paul Tucker and the CCDH, what's it called? The Center for Countering Digital Hate. Did you see the leak on their agenda? They literally had a note on there. They're working with the Biden-Harris administration. And it literally said, and that was earlier this year, kill Musk's Twitter. That was part of their plan on their agenda by the CCDH. So I'm not making it up. I'm not giving an opinion. So when you see things like this, when you see Starlink, so I understand that regulation in some cases is needed, and it's always a balance between too much regulation, and we'll talk about Elon's plan with the Doge and getting efficiency to the government, which I think you'll agree with. But when you see things like this, when you see things like what I mentioned, the FCC fast-tracking Soros's acquisition of 200 radio stations, never done before, and no good reasons for doing it, but then pulling a $900 million grant for SpaceX, for no good reason. I'm genuinely telling you this. Their reason was like, hey, you did not meet certain criteria that you didn't need to meet, that you had 2 years to meet that criteria. The government thinks you're doing a great job. They're signing contracts with you. The military signing contracts with you. Yet we don't think you're capable of achieving your goals. And they pulled that grant. Don't you see that heading towards, and that was before, Elon went all out supporting Trump. The way I see this, especially that agenda, it is an effort to target Elon. And it all started after his acquisition of Twitter. Now, when I see it by the mainstream media, I see some of the hit pieces. I know they do hit pieces on everybody, but there were way too many. I've seen it firsthand. Way too many on Elon. In my mind, I'm like, it's business. They see him as a competitor. They're targeting a competitor. That's fine. When you start seeing things like the CCDH, like the SEC and the FCC and the Fish and Wildlife Service, you can't look at this and say, hey, this is just business. This is regulation doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. So I got to be honest, I don't know the details of those stories well enough to be able to comment on them. But, if you said to me Soros got a contract he shouldn't have, that would be the least surprising thing I've ever heard. I mean, he's a giant donor, right? The donors get everything they want. So, in terms of Starlink, look, you and I probably disagree on X. I mean, I think X is a super interesting entity and I participate in it and I sometimes even enjoy it. On the other hand, Starlink is amazing. And so if you say to me that there's a particular story, I'll look into it, right? Because SpaceX, I mean, is super important to regulate there because you can't have any mistakes as you're going into space. On the other hand, has SpaceX done better than Boeing? Oh yeah. Right. So that's not close. And it could be that the right wing is better at elevating a message. And I think that there's truth to that as well. Right.
Or they're being, or another theory I was thinking about it when I was listening to you earlier. They're being suppressed on other social media platforms. I think we could agree there. They are very left-leaning in most cases. And then, we saw the Joe Rogan and Trump interview getting censored on YouTube. You've seen that, I'm sure. So then X was the only major platform they could be active on. A lot of people that were banned on other platforms were unbanned, including people on the left. Best example is Brian and Ed Krasenstein. They're very active on there. They were unbanned by Elon. Well, what about going to, I mentioned briefly his idea with Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency. Theoretically, I think that's something that the US government does need. Many governments around the world do need. Your thoughts on that, and then your thoughts on Elon's support for Trump. You've kind of gone, I'm sure you've heard his interview with Tucker Carlson, but he's gone all in on Trump. He's taking a big risk from a business perspective because if obviously Trump loses, which is looking less and less likely, but definitely still possible. If Trump loses, that could backfire heavily on Elon, because it's one thing to back a president behind the scenes, a candidate behind the scenes and donate here or there. It's another thing to just go all out, have those events, have America packed, the $1 million a day competition. So your thoughts on his strategy there? What led him to it, in your opinion? And then his idea with the Doge Department of Efficiency.
Yeah, I hate it.
You hate it? Wow. All right.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
expect that one.
yeah. Here's why. Is the government efficient enough? No, of course not, right? And so, for example, the Pentagon, it fails every audit. Doesn't even come close. Can't they're like, oh, we don't know where half the money went. Are you shitting me? That's $400 billion. You don't know where $400 billion went. Okay, so if you were doing real efficiency, God bless. But when a billionaire donor comes and says, hey, put me in charge of efficiency, let me just basically decide what goes in and what goes out of the government, I say, fuck no. No, I'm not putting George Soros in charge of government efficiency. I'm not putting Elon Musk in charge of government
Then
efficiency.
who would you put if you had to choose?
Whoever
What type of person? You look at Elon like someone who's done so much from a business perspective. For me, why not? Like, he's focused on efficiency when it comes to Twitter. He's done it at SpaceX. He's done it at Tesla.
No way. I look, I wouldn't even put a businessman that I really trust in charge of that. That is because you cannot have a conflict of interest. I mean,
Okay.
that, yeah, it is a massive, massive conflict of interest. So my answer to you on who I would put in charge is a real, like, look, bureaucrats understandably get a bad name because just like the name bureaucrat sounds boring and bad and inefficient, etc. Ironically, right? But someone who is a government official who has some expertise here, but most importantly, does not have a conflict of interest. Do they have to be honest, and do we all have to hold them accountable and publicly watch what they're doing? Yes, right? I wouldn't say, oh, yeah, trust the Democratic government official. It'll be fine. No, I don't trust them either. Okay. I don't trust anyone that's connected to the donors. But we have to have someone, maybe a retired judge, right? Something along those lines where you can have some sort of peace of mind that it's not going to be someone who's just going to do it for their own personal interest.
So would it be fair to conclude that he's capable of doing it, but your concerns are the potential conflicts of interest
Yeah, look, I
impacting his
don't,
decisions?
yes, yeah, that's definitely
Okay.
fair. On the other hand, like I said, Starlink, amazing. SpaceX, seems to be incredibly successful. Tesla, obviously, over the top success for a long time. So I don't know who Elon is. He's a mystery to me.
Last question on X is the metrics came out. I think Linda put them out today, and I was surprised by them. I thought there'd be a lot more Republicans or people that are leaning right, so are Republicans versus Democrats, because of obviously Elon being pro-Trump, but also Republicans being censored on other social media platforms. Again, I'm not sure whether you agree with that statement or not, and you can disagree. But then the numbers were pretty surprising. 37 million users on X were Democrats, talking about US users. 34 million were swing, and 32 million were Republicans. Now, the way the Democrats, in my opinion, have kind of looked at X is they've looked at it as a kind of a rival, as an enemy, instead of leveraging the platform.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on the strategy and your thoughts on the numbers as well?
So I think that a lot of Democrats and reporters use X and are secretly and not so secretly addicted to it, right? So I don't like, yeah, boogeyman, Elon's the boogeyman, we hate it because of Elon, blah blah blah. Sure, but they're still on there, right? And so every time everybody says, "Oh, I'm leaving X," I'm like, "Are you?" Uh, it's like when people say, if their candidate doesn't win the election, "Oh, I'm leaving the country."
Yeah, I'm
Are
leaving the
you?
country. Yeah,
Are
yeah,
you? I don't think you are. Okay. So on the other hand, so I think the real dynamic that you're asking about is again not left, right. No, in my experience, the platforms have not discriminated against the right wing. In fact, Facebook, before they got out of news and politics, if you looked on any given day, the top 10 best performing, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 were right wing, right. Bongino, Ben Shapiro, Bongino, Ben Shapiro, over and over and over again. By the way, Ben Shapiro and Mark Zuckerberg, really good friends. So
yeah. But
things
Mark
that
is
make
kind
you
of
go,
started. Yeah, true. I've seen also Mark has shifted his stance. He's had that apology just a few months ago. But what are your thoughts on? I mentioned it briefly earlier. YouTube censoring and then kind of putting it back on. I'm not sure if they put out an apology. The interview between Trump and Joe Rogan. Have you seen that? So if you search Joe Rogan Trump on YouTube, you could scroll down and down and down and down. You could not see it anywhere there. And then after people started talking about it on X, it started popped up again after a day or two. Are
no,
you
I
aware of
hadn't
that?
seen that. No, I hadn't seen that, but last I checked, which was a while back, 34 million people had watched it. So it's not like it's not getting watched, right? And
True,
I
true.
don't, if they did that, that would be super weird because I watched the whole interview and there was nothing particularly controversial at all in that interview. So it's actually
But you
almost
did say Trump did look. I did. I was. That was the last video I was listening before the interview. Kind of your take on the Joe Rogan interview. One of the first things you said, Trump did look presidential. I think you disagreed with a lot of the things he said. I mean, you said Joe Rogan did not push back enough. What was your conclusion from that interview, and how much impact do you think it had on the election?
So I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I don't want to leave the social media conversation without
Please,
saying
yeah,
the
yeah, of course.
most important point. Look, the most important point there is that it's not left versus right. It's populist versus establishment. So the establishment loves mainstream media because they control the message through there. And that's why Hillary Clinton the other day was like, we're losing control of the message. We got to shut down TikTok. We got to shut down these social media. And so Mitt Romney and Anthony Blinken said the quiet part out loud in a conference they were at. Romney said, you know, the Israelis are usually really good at PR, but they can't stop all the stuff that's happening on TikTok. So we got to shut it down for them. And I was like, oh my God, he said it out loud. And Blinken's like, oh yeah, yeah. So the establishment hates social media because they can't control the message.
Control it. Yeah.
Yeah, and they used to just say, okay, Mika, you say this, and you know, and Anderson, you say that. Again, not a cabal, but groupthink. And Mika Brzezinski, they always slip up a little bit, right? Mika Brzezinski, after the 2016 election, said on air, you know, Hillary's people always complained when we suggested that she might not be winning. And so we you know, basically says something along the lines of, so we stopped doing that. And I was like, you just admitted that the Hillary people talk to you all the time. You take their notes and then you do what they tell you to do on air, right? That's why the establishment hates that social media has interrupted their monopoly on what they call news, but that what I think is actually propaganda. And so, I mean, look, mainstream media comically my whole life has been saying that donor money doesn't affect any of the politicians. Come on. Come on. Who are we kidding? And then they would gaslight people so thoroughly that when I said, and this is why I'm banned on all three cable news outlets, when I say, yeah, obviously they're taking the donor money, and then on the Young Turks, we will predict before the bills which way the bill is going to go. And we're almost never wrong. Why? Because follow the money. It's the easiest thing in the world. Whichever side has more donors, and sometimes the Democrats have more donors, they win. Okay, the more money wins. And New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, you never figured this out? All of your brilliant reporters and editors and producers, and nobody put two and two together that the donors win every single time. There was a Princeton and Northwestern studied 20 years, nearly 2,000 bills. Top 10% have a huge effect on public policy. The bottom 90% have a 0% effect. That's not a democracy. And that's brought to you by mainstream media. So I love social media. I love the populist movement. So I don't want anybody getting it twisted. I'll fight the left or the Democrats, whoever I need to fight to make sure we protect social media.